invite Talha Nawaz, who will talk about the basics about the identification of acute respiratory failure with hypoxemia.
Thank you, Farooq. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So as Farooq said, so I'll start with basics. So I'm going to share my screen here so that we have this, one PowerPoint presentation which we can look at and talk about things. So can you guys see the PowerPoint?
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right. So I will start with few major, mistakes and misconceptions. They're very basic things, but sometimes we overlook them, and that can be dangerous. First of all, we need to be clear what's the difference between hypoxia and hypoxemia. Hypoxia is basically, low tissue oxygen levels, and that's in shock and multi-organ failure. But hypoxemia, which is basically talked today, is more of about dissolved oxygen concentration in blood and partial pressure of oxygen as we look into ABGs. Next thing is like most common inpatient oxygen saturation levels, which most of the physicians look at are maintaining, is above 92%. But we have to be careful, with that conclusion, since people can have greater than 92% cutaneous saturation, but they can still have mild hypoxemia. And as we go down our presentation, will discuss about those situations where we can still be hypoxemic despite your saturation level greater than 92%. And the third thing is dyspnea is not always present in mild hypoxemia. It can be present, but absence of dyspnea does not mean that there's no mild hypoxemia. And mild hypoxemia can present, as we know, most commonly like confusion and people acting funny and those kind of things rather than having difficulty with breathing. So as I said, hypoxia is state of low oxygen in tissue. And then it represents a failure of circulatory system. It could be primarily cardiac, distributic shock, septic shock, various kinds of shocks, and that can cause lactic acid to go up and lactic acidosis. So we treat this not by just giving oxygen. That's a very minor component of their treatment. Major component is to actually treat the etiology of the shock and then increase cardiac output and vascular tone if appropriate. This is just an equation. It shows oxygen delivery to tissues. As you can see, it depends on cardiac output, hemoglobin levels, oxygen saturation, and amount of oxygen dissolved in blood. So this applies more in hypoxia and shock situation. As you can see, PaO2, which is amount of dissolved oxygen in blood, is multiplied by 0.003. So that is not the major factor which we look at while we are treating someone with shock. We actually focus more on cardiac output and hemoglobin. If that's low, we try to fix that. But there are situations where there is shock with extremely low hemoglobin levels, and in that case, even this small amount of dissolved oxygen in blood can become important, and we try to increase that. But that's a minor component. So now hypoxemia. So there is this, partial pressure of oxygen which we check on ABGs. The cutoff which is commonly considered is 60. So if oxygen pressure is less than 60 millimeter of mercury, it is considered hypoxemia. And mild hypoxemia is usually considered, as you can see in the graph, from 55 to 60. And as I mentioned earlier, dyspnea may be mild or absent, but more important features which we should not overlook are confusion, agitation, sinus tachycardia, and tachypnea. Tachypnea is stimulated because patients, if they get hypoxia, they have this hypoxic hyperventilation reflex, which is a central drive, which is not necessarily associated with dyspnea. So dyspnea may be absent, but patient may have this tachypnea. But we need to remember that this, while we are in this mild hypo.
I'm sorry, Tala. I think we got disconnected from the live broadcast. So just wait for 1 minute, okay?
Okay.
Because we have our audience in the Zoom, but we should be talking live. So just a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And also keep an eye on that chat box when we are like, it was going very smoothly, but I think something wrong with my laptop. But let's see now again.
Okay. Just let me know when you're ready.
Yeah, sure. Just it's gonna be in 1 minute.
Okay.
Vikas, I think you are live. I can see you on Facebook.
Okay, so that's
Yeah.
fine then. We can go ahead. Okay.
Yeah.
So I thought we got disrupted, but it looks like we are live.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So as I was talking about mild hypoxemia, so we have to remember this thing that when someone has mild hypoxemia, they are on this steep portion of hemoglobin oxygen dissociation curve, and even a little more worsening of hypoxemia can desaturate them profoundly, like they can fall to 70% on peripheral oxygen, cutaneous saturations. And then severe hypoxemia is usually less than PaO2 of 50 or 55, and they can have extreme dyspnea as opposed to mild hypoxemia, and then they can have lactate accumulation, resting hypoxia, and then eventually, if it gets worse to a point, they can have cardiac arrest as well. So there are various ways of assessing oxygenation and acute hypoxemic respiratory failure. We can, group them into three major categories. There's AA gradient and those discussion, but will not go there. We can look at that in these three different, subgroups. So normal oxygenation and room air, we breathe on 21% FiO2, and PaO2 is 75 to 100 milligram of mercury. If we look at that room air levels on sea level, room air at sea level, and if we give someone who has normal oxygenation, 100% oxygen FiO2, then they'll have PaO2 of about 660 millimeter of mercury. Then VQ mismatch. So this is basically one of the mechanisms where we have more perfusion relative to ventilation, and then it can cause low VQ ratio, and it usually corrects pretty well with increased FiO2. And then on that spectrum, there's shunt physiology, which is actually an extreme of low VQ mismatch, where instead of decreased ventilation, there is actually no ventilation. And so this is a severe condition, and this does not usually correct with just giving oxygen, 100% oxygen. We usually treat this condition by increasing mean airway pressure, which is achieved by PEEP, by increasing PEEP, and I think Farooq and Aftab will touch on that later on. Usually in COVID pneumonia, we deal with shunting in severe, COVID ARDS situation. This is a little repetition of the same thing. So we're looking at mechanisms. So mild hypoxemia, when PO2 is 54 to 59, it can present as tachypnea, and which is derived by hypoxic hyperventilation reflex. So if you look at alveolar gas equation, I haven't shared it here, but by decreasing CO2, you can actually increase alveolar oxygen based on that formula or equation. So that's body's reflex to do that. And then when it does that, there's an increased work of breathing. We have to remember that the other supratentorial causes of tachypnea, like pain or anxiety, that does not really cause any diaphragmatic weakness or increased work of breathing, as opposed to mild hypoxemia, which can give you increased work of breathing and diaphragmatic weakness. The next thing is tachycardia. So with hypoxemia, there is pulmonary artery pressure elevation, which can actually decrease stroke volume. So to maintain body's cardiac output, there's reflex tachycardia sometimes, and that's also one of the manifestations of mild hypoxemia. I don't know if you can see that, but this is a picture of a normal PET scan, and you see three organs are lighted up. One is brain and left ventricle, and then renal cortex. So these are the organs which have the highest oxygen extraction normally, and these are the organs which affect which are affected in mild hypoxemia. So mental status changes, agitation, confusion, and then with hypoxemia, it does cause heart failure with diastolic heart failure exacerbation. It can cause that by various mechanisms. One of that is that it causes subendocardial ischemia, which can cause stiffening of left ventricle, and then the tachycardia, reflex tachycardia, shortens diastole, there's less time for left ventricle to fill, and that also exacerbates heart failure with with preserved ejection fraction. And we have seen that most of the patients with COVID pneumonia, they most of the time have elevated pro-BNP levels, and Most of the time that's because of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction rather than myocarditis. Myocarditis is another complication, but that's less common, and usually that reflects with left ventricle ejection fraction reduction, which is not the case here. And then the third thing is acute kidney injury. So these are the early things which can happen with acute mild hypoxemia. Then as we go further down, if PO2 decreases more than 50, then that's a severe hypoxemia, and then there can be extreme dyspnea, which can be very hard to manage. In our experience in ICUs, getting rid of this severe dyspnea is a difficult thing to do, especially COVID patients are intubated, but other patients like pulmonary fibrosis or end-stage pulmonary patients, sometimes that's a very difficult situation to look at, extreme dyspnea. So also they'll have increased lactate production even at rest in severe hypoxemia. And then cardiac arrest from severe hypoxemia is very specific. It usually starts with bradycardia. So heart rate starts dropping from 70, 60, 40, and all of a sudden you lose the pulse and pulseless electrical activity initiates, and then you have to start chest compressions and port patients. So this brings us to evaluation of hypoxemia. So this is just the similar concept. So basically, as I said, VQ mismatch, then shunt physiology is the extreme of the VQ mismatch. And then in VQ mismatch, for example, the lungs, a portion of lung in pneumonia can be filled with some fluid, and then that decreases the area of lung available for ventilation. So that's low VQ. And then sometimes, for example, in asthma, due to bronchospasm, there's not enough air in that lung compartment for, so that's relative reduction of ventilation as compared to perfusion. So we can get that information based on history and examination. In shunt physiology is usually more visible on imaging because they usually have diffuse alveolar damage where there's no ventilation as opposed to less ventilation in low VQ mismatch, and there's actually no air movement at all. So you could see chest X's with diffuse damage, and I'll show you a couple of pictures in next slide. And then there's another term called anatomic shunt, which is not really related to COVID pneumonia, but if there's no abnormality on X-rays or CT scan, then sometimes we consider anatomic shunts, and we look with bubble studies on contrast echocardiogram to look for if there's any intracardiac shunting or extracardiac shunting like AVM or malformation, but it's not really related to COVID pneumonia. So these are some of the pictures. On the first one, you see there's diffuse alveolar filling, so there's diffuse damage, and there's really basically no lung available for ventilation. So that's one of the conditions of shunting. In the next picture, you see left lung collapse. Complete left lung is really collapsed either due to mucus plug or some other reasons. Then it can also show that's the mechanism shunting causing hypoxemia. And then we see two more pictures here. So this is a hospitalized patient. I took this picture from ATS webinar. So they actually, if you see at the first image, you don't really see a whole lot of issues going on in lung parenchyma other than some basal atelectasis. So this is an obese patient who had very difficult oxygenation, even on ventilator with 100% of oxygen and high PEEP. And this is the first X-ray on post-op day 1, and then we see another X-ray on day 14. As you can see, the atelectasis in lower lobe on both sides is dissolved, and the gas oxygenation improved a whole lot in this situation. So sometimes it's really hard to tell. Looking at first X-ray, if you miss that there's a significant atelectasis, you would not think that this patient would have profound hypoxemia, but only when you compare it to the improved X-ray, you can really tell how much reduction in lung volume is present there. This brings us to another topic, and that's for pulse oximetry. As I talked a little bit earlier in introduction, pulse oximetry is a useful screening test, but we have to be very careful when we interpret, pulse oximetry. So on oxygen saturation of 91 to 92% on pulse oximetry usually corresponds to PO2 of about 60 at a pH of 7.40. So that's very important to remember, because As pH goes up, then this correlation gets changed, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So we always have to keep in mind that there's always plus minus 3-point error on pulse oximetry when we have to interpret PO2 based on that, and we have to take into account if patient is alkalotic or acidic at that moment to interpret that. Usually, if pulse oximetry shows oxygen saturation greater than 94%, which is like 95%, that's very reassuring, and you can probably think that PO2 is greater than 60. But make sure there's a good pulse oximetry waveform, and the picture here which you see here is a good pulse oximeter waveform. So if there's a good waveform and the pulse oximetry shows oxygen saturation greater than 94%, there's very high probability that patient does not have mild hypoxemia. And if they're having confusion, AKI, or heart failure exacerbation, that is not related to mild hypoxemia. There may be another cause which we need to look into. As I said earlier, so there are conditions where pulse oximeter would show oxygen saturation greater than 92%, which is the most common cutoff level used in hospitalized patients. But even with greater than 92%, they may still have mild hypoxemia, especially if they're alkalotic. Just carrying on the same discussion, this is a hemoglobin oxygen dissociation curve. This dark green line is at a pH of 7.40. And then you see another curve on left side, which is in a patient with alkalosis. And there's another curve on right side. So basically acidosis shifts your curve to right side and alkalosis shifts your curve to left side. I want you to pay attention to this red box here. So as you can tell, this line here represents PO2 of 60. On right side of this one, there's no hypoxemia. On left side of this line, there is hypoxemia. So if you pay attention to this red box, in this case, patient has oxygen saturation greater than 90%, and it's up to like 95%, but they still have PO2 less than 60. So their PO2 ranges from 55 to 60. So they actually, even though their oxygen saturation is greater than 90, with this alkalosis, their PO2 is still less than 60. So they are still having mild hypoxemia. So we have to be careful, with that. And then the other thing to note on this graph is that with alkalosis, this graph becomes more steep. So even a little bit more reduction of PO2 will cause significant decrease in this oxygen saturation. So if you go from PO2 of 55 to like 50, oxygen saturation may drop from 92 to like in 70s or 60%. So this makes it more steep here. So that's something important to consider while interpreting those values. So now, so Farah will talk more about in details on this one, but I just want you to look at this ABG here. So this is a patient who is tachypnic. His pH is 7.46, and his PCO2 is decreased, and PO2 is 60. So even though patient's PO2 is 60, but he is tachypnic, so he is basically hypoxemic at this point, because our goal should be to have PO2 of greater than 60 without hyperventilation if we can, because as I said earlier, hyperventilation, hypoxic hyperventilation response is a body response to actually low oxygen saturations. So they actually hyperventilate. So PCO2 goes down, patient becomes alkalotic, and their PO2 can go up a little bit with that. In this case, as you can see. So we should always target for oxygen saturation greater than 94%. That's the most safe thing to do. If we don't have blood gas available, if we don't have ABG available, that's the most safe thing to do, to target oxygen saturation greater than 94%. But if we have ABGs available, then we should target PO2 of greater than 60 millimeter of mercury. Sometimes hypoxemia is severe enough that with low oxygen, which Farooq will talk about, it doesn't really get better. You have to increase the flow and then apply a PEEP and then consider for intubation in those conditions. So this is a big algorithm, I'm not going to go into too many details here, but just basic things. So this patient who is on room air and saturating more than 94% with oxygen pressure of greater than 60, this patient, you can just watch him and he's not hypoxemic. If that's not the case, then you can initiate with nasal cannula. And if they're maintaining oxygen saturation greater than 94 and oxygen pressure greater than 60, you can just wash them. But if that's not the case and patient is requiring more oxygen flow, then we have to consider a trial of non-invasive support versus consider early intubation. And Farrukh will talk more about that. But every institute has different, protocols and algorithms. If you have one in your hospital, stick to that. But from this one, actually you can see patients where we can consider trial of non-invasive support would be ideal, or good candidates would be who have some underlying lung disease like COPD or asthma, which gets some help with non-invasive ventilation, or they have cardiogenic pulmonary edema, or if they have some other risk factors for cardiac edema like AKI. In those patients, you can give a trial of non-invasive support. But if patient does not have any of those conditions and they are having rapidly worsening oxygenation, you can bypass non-invasive ventilation and go straight to invasive ventilation. And if someone is on non-invasive and then they're not doing too well, later on you can consider intubating them. So here I'll actually stop here and then hand over discussion to Farrukh, who can actually talk about non-invasive ventilation as well as other modes of providing oxygen to patients.
Okay, thanks so much, Tala. That was a very comprehensive presentation about the detection of acute respiratory failure.